the 61st episode of the Superhero Ethics Podcast. My name is Matthew. I'm one of your hosts. Joining me, as always, is Jacob, another one of our hosts. Jacob, what's going on today?
Hi, everybody. This one's a little bit later. That's my fault. Holidays are a thing, I guess, and it's very difficult to get my schedule to do anything reasonable around this time of year.
Holidays, since I spend at least a good portion of my time working in the gaming industry in retail at a board game store, I sort of understand what you mean. It's been kind of crazy at my work as well. So, no worries. I'm glad we're going to have this conversation now. And what we're talking about today is we're kind of doing an end-of-the-year wrap-up. It was a really popular show at the end of 2017, and we wanted to do the same thing today. Kind of look back at 2018, talk about what were some of our favorite characters, some of our favorite issues, some of the favorite things that came up, and then talk about as we look forward to 2019. What are we looking forward to? What are we a little bit maybe nervous about or concerned about? And what's just kind of our final hopes for the end of the year. So I'm looking forward to doing this and kind of jumping in, and I figured let's just kind of jump right in and talk about the first kind of list we have is our 5 favorite characters. And we didn't kind of go over it too much, but I'll kind of give you the rubric I was using. I'm wondering how similar it was for you. I'm kind of approaching this as both an ethicist and a fan, trying to be mostly an ethicist, but also just somewhat of a fan. But really I'm trying to look at questions of either stories that we were introduced to in 2018 or stuff that really only kind of came to hopefully everyone's attention, but certainly my attention in 2018. Is that about kind of where you were coming from?
Yes. So, like, the characters that I selected for this weren't all, like, originated in 2018, but they were in media in 2018, and we've talked about all of them, right. I think, possibly with one exception, this year as well. And I did a similar thing where I tried to take characters that I liked not just because Jacob personally consuming the media likes the character, but also because I really thought that the ethics surrounding the character were at least interesting to talk about, even if they weren't something I agreed with.
Nice. Yeah, I think I kind of came down in a pretty similar place, so it sounds like we're right there. So, and I'm actually going to start by, so you have 5 favorite characters?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to start with an honorable mention that I threw on right at the end, which breaks all of those rules. Because this is a character who was certainly not introduced to us, and was certainly not... we weren't even talking about his stories from 2018, but was introduced to me really in a new way by folks like you and Jessica Plummer and Jess Dunks and some of the others, and that's Superman. I had really my opinion changed quite a bit on the character of Superman this year because of the discussions that we had a couple of times, but especially in the episode that we just had with Jessica Plummer, and the episode that you and I did earlier with Jess Dunks about the Red Sun book, and also the Kingdom Come that we did earlier in the year.
We talked about Supes 3 times this year. It's an unprecedented amount of DC coverage for us.
Yeah, it's true. Especially because I've been pretty clear that he's by far not my favorite character. So I'm a little surprised we went so deep there, but I'm happily so. I think he raises some really good questions that I'm glad we got to go into. So with that, Jacob, who's your number 5?
So number 5, I have T'Challa from Black Panther. So just many reasons. Like, I think T'Challa is such a breath of fresh air for a masculine superhero in general. Mm-hmm. In how he approaches different situations. I love that he can admit when he was wrong. And is painted in that light of, like, even though he was on the right side in terms of not doing, like, particularly monstrous things, he still changed policy as a result of what he saw to be a reasonable argument. He was able to dissociate that from the fact that he had to fight this particular individual who was doing some not very good things, right? Yeah. And just, God, T'Challa is just such a really strong character, but strong in that different way. Do you know what I mean? I'm having difficulty putting words on it. Like, he's strong in his determination without being aggressive in his strength.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of saying it. I think, I kind of get cliched, but basically he is. I saw him as a kind of a different definition of masculinity. as a character,
Yeah.
And as a hero in a way that I really loved. And I'm glad you put him on the list. He was someone I was thinking about for my list. I did not have him on, so at least we're not in danger of having the same 5. But I do have someone from that world who we'll get to.
Okay.
Mine is like you, most of the ones that I have on here are going to be folks who I think we've talked about at some point, although again, I'm breaking the rules early, because my number 5 is not. But it's the character of Tandy, or Dagger, from the Cloak and Dagger show.
Okay.
It's a really good show that I'm really looking forward to us talking about it sometime in the next year. I'm going to, as always, folks, spoilers for pretty much everything that's been on, but this one I'm going to not spoil too much because I think not too many people have seen it. But it's a very interesting portrait because I think often what we get in shows like this is that when someone gets their powers, it either confirms exactly who they are, sort of morally, or more likely it causes them to really be forced to make a decision. Are they a good person or a bad person? Are they a hero or a villain? And for an awful lot of the show, the character of Dagger is very morally gray. She is clearly one of our heroines because of some of the terrible things that are happening to her, but she is also not on the right side of the law or even on the right side of ethics all the time. And I think it makes her a very interesting character study because, first of all, it's one where, it's about 2 young people, 1 man, 1 woman. There isn't a romance between the 2 of them, which is so refreshing. And her character is portrayed as romantically interested in other people, but she always has the power in those relationships. And she's not the sort of weak flower who's waiting for someone else. She's the more physically violent one compared to her partner, Cloak. So yeah, it was just, I felt it was a really interesting twist on a lot of the cliches that we often get. One that I really enjoyed and looking forward to talking about more.
That sounds like I should definitely start watching that show at some point, because that definitely sounds like, again, this a different way of painting these stories than I've seen, especially given the and Cloak and Dagger were, I feel, always kind of like that because Cloak was always the less physically impactful character because that's their whole oeuvre, as it were. But it's would be nice, I think, to see that in the sort of modern motion picture media, to see how that gets portrayed.
Definitely. So who's your number 4?
So number 4, and I finally get to put one of these characters on this list and say that we talked about them this year. I have Sam Winchester. Nice. From Supernatural. And it's actually because this year, and so spoilers for you and for anybody else listening, for 10 seasons after you stopped watching, it's gotten to a point where Sam has actually made the transition from just being, basically a foot soldier who's fighting the good fight against all of the monsters, and has actually become a leader and an organizer of hunters. He's finally stepping into that kind of a role.
Interesting.
And we see him struggling with it and having some clashes of ego with people who are all like, well, who put you in charge? And dealing with it in really healthy ways, and actually worrying about the people he's sending off to different places. Because he knows the job is dangerous, but still making the choices, still going we don't have the bandwidth to not just send you, so we're going to send just you. And I feel, especially for how much that show has changed and evolved over time, and how much stuff they've thrown away, seeing Sam sort of become this almost fatherly figure, and in one particular way, because they introduced a new character where basically Sam and Dean and Castiel are all dads to this new character they've introduced in the last 2 years. And it's super cool to see that. And to see them, Sam in particular, have this kind of finally maturing into somebody who's not just a doer, but actually thinks about the bigger picture and takes some leadership decisions, is just a place I feel the show probably should have gone about 5 seasons ago, but they had a lot of other ideas, some of which were good and some of which were not.
That sounds powerful, and I'm glad to hear that, because I did quite like the character of Dean Winchester. For Sam. I like both of them in the early seasons of what I watched. As I mentioned before, about season 4 or 5, they made some real decisions that made me decide to check out, but I'm glad that they've kind of gone back in on things and turned some things around. Because that is, I think, a very interesting question of when do you kind of switch over from the foot soldier to the leader? And I think it's interesting that so often and this is more with like cop shows and army and like army stories or military stories, but even for these, most of the time the kind of story we get is the people on the ground are the good ones and they know what's going on and they're cool and awesome, and the people who are in leadership are, you know, either stuffed shirts or they're following the rules or they're all
they're out of touch. They're they don't care about they care about just straight numbers and not people, those kinds of things. Yep.
Yeah, so it's nice to see a story about someone sort of intentionally making that move and doing it in a good way.
So how about you? Who's your number 4?
So my 4, and maybe this says something about which one of the two characters we picked, is also from Black Panther. It's Eric Killmonger.
Okay.
I found him. I agree that T'Challa is a great character. To me, it is Killmonger who makes the movie. Both because I think Michael B. Jordan is just such a fantastic actor and has that wonderful mix of charm and beauty and deadliness all at the same time. That's just so powerful to watch. But mostly because I thought his character raised such compelling, difficult questions. You know, and as you talked about it, in some ways it's him and T'Challa together because it's the two sides of the same coin. But the degree to which Killmonger really, you know, forced the people of Black Panther to push this question of, if you have all these kind of resources, what are you doing if you're not helping others? As well as pushing this question of violence and of, is it, you know, what are the ethics of fighting back and helping others fight back against oppression? And his just whole idea, you know, in some ways I feel like there was such a, and again, you and I intentionally didn't go too far into the movie because we both sort of felt as white guys we weren't really the right ones to cover this, and there were some great other articles we linked to, and I continue to say that my voice should not be the definitive one on this, but from both what I observed and saw, but also what I've read from so many others, that Killmonger raises such good questions about, you know, just the differences between African and African American, and what does it mean to be an African American, a black person in this country, cut off from the history and the heritage of Africa, and you know, some of the ways it was portrayed in terms of like how T'Challa is so connected to all of that, and Killmonger is cut off from that, and the way Killmonger, you know, who is responsible for that. I just found Killmonger such an engaging character, and to me, there were many points in that movie where I was honestly not sure if I should be rooting for him. And that at the end of the day is just my favorite kind of story, where there's someone who's theoretically the villain, and I'm not quite sure if I should be rooting for him. So yeah, he's definitely my number 4.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't even disagree with you that it's Killmonger that makes the movie Black Panther great.
Yeah.
I feel the T'Challa character needs to be there, obviously because the story's sort of named after him, but like also because you need that kind of hero to deal with that kind of villain in a way that I can stomach.
Oh, for sure.
Because if T'Challa's response was more of a, nope, just going to completely shut you down and crush you, and we're going to have a slugfest, and then at the end of the day I'm going to raise my hands and shout into the sky, and I get the girl and whatever other really bad negative tropes we want to throw into here, I wouldn't have liked that movie at all.
So who's your number 3?
Number 3, I have Jessica Jones.
Nice.
I love the character of Jessica Jones a lot. And this year, she did a lot of things where I got mad at her. Because this year was Jessica Jones season 2, and this was the year where Jessica just made a lot of decisions where she was, I can't even really fault her for how she approached the situation with her mother, right? And that's like, when I can sit here and look at a hero and go, I love everything about this character, I don't agree with decisions they're making, but I can empathize with them enough to go, I understand why you're doing that. Like, that's good writing. If I can sit there and say, I mean, and you and I had a slightly different take on Jessica Jones season 2. I'm still of the opinion that I thought it was very good, but part of that may be that I'm just was way focused on Jessica's story throughout that, and then to a lesser extent Trish's story as well throughout that, even though the conflict coming up toward the end there was not something that I think either of us was a fan of. And I like this year how she was struggling with whether she needs to be, basically in some ways she was struggling with whether she needs to be that sort of disconnected, dissociated, dispassionate hero so that she can like not kill anybody again or not like get into that point and really control herself, or if she and also like that whole hero needs to not have connections so that they're safe and like nobody can get at you through your connections, and she just at the end of the season actually chooses to step away from that and go, nope, I'm gonna connect with the people around me, I'm gonna start caring about them, and I'm gonna start helping people, because like I like that whole transition. And I also like that it makes a lot of sense from her history that it took her a while to get there.
Yeah, I definitely hear your points. It was funny as you were saying this. I do disagree with you quite a lot in terms of my moral perspective on the character of Jessica Jones. I find it a lot. I find it easy. I can relate to what she does, but I still find it very hard to empathize or sympathize with the decisions she makes, or certainly to forgive her in any way for them. But in many ways, that's definitely a sign of a great character, because she's a character who the two of us can watch and recognize she's dealing with some very ethical questions that there isn't a clear answer to, that the two of us can have a disagreement of. So I definitely can see why that she's on your list, because I think I think that that's a powerful thing. I think for me, probably the only thing keeping her off my list is just my disappointment of where she was season 2 versus season 1. But I definitely can understand, especially if you had a more positive view on that, where she comes in. My view, my number 3 is another woman from the Netflix MCU. Unsurprisingly, we've got a couple of those on this list. Although someone who I think is a little more clear where they stand morally, and that's Black Mariah Dillard.
Okay, very good.
Which I don't give anything away, but I'm guessing that's the first overlap you and I have.
No, actually it isn't. Believe it or not, Mariah Dillard did not make my list.
Interesting. Okay, I mean, in part that just shows what a rich year we had in terms of characters. And we talked about Luke Cage recently, and so I don't want to go too much into all of that again. But I just found her character, I think, really did something unique on a number of levels. First of all, just the descent. You know, I think one thing we've talked about before in this show is the tension of someone who is trying to sort of do not great things, but in sort of at least officially good ways, or at least acceptable ways, and what happens when you start cutting corners and then cut more corners. The fact that they showed us a lot about her past and some of the horrible things that had been done to her, and that she'd been involved in with her family. We'd gotten hints at that from season 1, but we saw a lot more of it season 2. That again make you empathize with her somewhat, and make you. It's funny because I just said I didn't really with Jessica Jones, and it's not quite the same. Because I certainly can understand where Jessica's coming from, and I by no means can forgive Mariah. But I could so relate to her. I could understand exactly how a person could get to where she had gotten to, and how she could go so far off the deep end once she started to really sort of give up the idea of trying to do things the right way. And especially the scene like where she burns all of her rivals, and then when she just kills people so blatantly in the prison. It really just it had that idea to me of when someone who has been repressing something so much and trying so hard to be just barely on the right side of respectable finally decides to break bad and to just not care anymore. That goes real deep real fast. I've spoken for a while on her, but the other thing I just want to touch on, and we touched on it last year with season 1 of Luke Cage, but I want to mention it again. Having one of the main sort of romantic sexual characters of the show be a middle-aged woman who is also a middle-aged black woman. I hate the fact that that's revolutionary. And revolutionary is the wrong word, because it certainly has happened before on TV, but very rarely. And I loved the way they played her character as a romantic character, as a sexual character, not doing it for laughs, not doing it as, can you imagine how screwed up Shades is? But very clearly showed why Shades would be in love with her, and why that relationship, when it broke so hard for both of them. That to me again just makes her such a character I adored.
Yeah, like as soon as you said Mariah Dillard, I was like, oh man, why isn't Mariah on my list? But She's not. I'm just being honest. But it was that kind of reaction because she was such a strong part of Luke Cage season 2, and I said it when we were talking about Luke Cage last year, I want to say, or maybe even earlier this year, when I was bemoaning how the later, in a couple of different sort of throwaway lines, how the later half of the season I just wasn't that into Diamondback and really just wanted Mariah to be the principal villain. And then this year we got that, and it was basically everything that I wanted, in some things that I didn't expect, like her relationship with her daughter being a principal part of the plot. Also, like, added another degree of depth to her character and added another, like, humanizing factor, which was important because it would be very easy to paint Mariah Dillard in the narrative just as a monster and someone that you can't, like, no one could relate to, and, you know, therefore when they die everyone just cheers. And they didn't do that, and I like that a lot more. That they really made it clear this is a person that is, you know, this is what their life has come to, and here's the circumstances that brought them here, and it makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely think that's right. Who's your number 2?
All right. Number 2, also from MCU, because, you know, that sweet money that we get in the mail. Also from Luke Cage, but also in Iron Fist, Misty Knight.
Yeah.
Misty is, like, the hero that I really want every other Marvel Netflix hero to be more like. She's, you know, she can have fun, but she's, like, when she's working, she's no nonsense. I love her whole, like, ability to reassemble a crime scene thing, both how they do it, and also the fact that, like, you know, she kicks a lot of ass, right? She is very, very good at fighting, at physical altercations. But there's this other aspect to her character as a detective that, like, no other character has something like that going on. It's funny that both my third and my second are both effectively detectives. I might have an archetype that I really like in my superheroes.
I can see that.
But, like, but Jessica Jones and Misty Knight are not carbon copies. They approach things very, very differently, and they have different personalities in their interactions. I also, like, kind of liked how when she came on to Iron Fist, one of the things she did was start making side eyes at oh god, now I can't remember his first name. Rand. Not Rand. No, not Danny. The other family, not Joy. Joy's brother. Why can't I think of his name now?
The brother. That's all we need. Yeah.
Yeah, but, like, so, like, in that whole thing and how she had, like, an interaction with Colleen, also her scene with Colleen in the bar, where, you know, that was also, you know, clearly a straw man argument scene, but at the same time it was one that was, you know, if that had been done 15 years ago, some guy hero would have shown up to, like, stop the fight or teach the people a lesson, and I like that. No, they didn't need that because it was Misty and Colleen, and they're perfect. And I also like how Colleen just went like, she's got it. Yep. Sat back and took a drink.
We're going to talk more about the history of that, the direction of the Netflix MCU at some later point, because I think it's a really good topic and one I'm looking forward to jumping into later tonight. Because I've got a lot of fears, a lot of hopes and excitements about it. But I'll just say, if there's one thing I most want from Netflix besides the continuation of Daredevil, it's that we get Daughters of the Dragon. Not Netflix. Who knows? Again, we'll get to that. But because you're right, Misty Knight was such a good character this year, and I'd echo most of what you just said. I think the only thing I would add as well is, and it's funny because this is something that at first disappointed me, what they've done with her bionic arm. Because at first when she got her bionic arm, I wanted that to be like, let's see all the cool gadgets. Let's see the cool things it can do. Let's, like, really play with this fun new technology. And I was disappointed at first that it didn't do that. I was very disappointed that it was made by Rand and not Stark Tech, because I thought that was just such a dumb way of breaking continuity. Or like not having, the movies and the TV shows inform each other. But I've come to really appreciate it, because I think the more I think about it, the more easy I think it would be for that to just sort of take over her character. And instead, she gets to have this strong arm, she gets to do cool things, and yet it's her detectiveness, it's her character, it's her love for the neighborhood and desire to heal the neighborhood, but to do it on one particular side of the law, and to wrestle with that question of the law. Those are, to me, the defining things about her character instead of just what she does with this cool arm. So, yeah, I think she's a very strong character.
Yeah, and there was also this whole thing where, like, immediately after she got the arm, she actually struggled with it, and it was more of a hindrance than it was a help. And I thought that was a better way to paint that narrative than to just be like, oh, all better plus upgrade. Why don't I just cut my other arm off now then? Like, that's less good, right?
Yeah, and that was, as I think I've mentioned on the show before, I myself have a prosthetic leg, and I'm often frustrated by TV shows where, the character, we see them get injured, and the next episode they're in the hospital for an episode or two, and then they're out with a prosthesis, and it's working just great. When the reality is, at least in my case, it took 9 months from my losing my leg to my having a prosthesis that could fit, just because of all the healing that needed to be done, and the relearning of things, and the helping atrophied muscles. And superhero world, superhero tech, it's going to be a little faster, but still, I liked having at least that little bit. Number 2 is going to be a huge galloping shock to people, because I've never talked about liking this character before, but we have another villain from the MCU Netflix, and that's Kingpin. We're going to, at some point soon, get into Daredevil Season 2. Daredevil Season 3. We'll probably do that as an episode early in 2019. I know you haven't finished that show yet, so I don't want to spoil too much. But I continue to think that Kingpin is, I think, the strongest character in the entire MCU. And certainly, probably to this point, my favorite villain. And what they do with him in Season 3 of Daredevil, of really showing that he is still, Kingpin to me is someone who isn't just, he's the one always pulling the strings. He's always the one manipulating everything from the background. And Season 1 of Daredevil, he very much wasn't that. He was kind of the pawn of Madame Gao and of the other people of the Hand, without even realizing that. Season 3, I feel like, is really where Wilson Fisk becomes Kingpin, and we just see how much he can manipulate things, how much he can be pulling the strings from behind the scenes, but how much he still is doing it for reasons that are, if not ones we agree with, at least ones we'd be sympathetic to. He's not just wanting power. He is wanting to help the city, to help his neighborhood, and also to get back the woman he loves. And that doesn't justify the things he does, but it makes him, I think, such a compelling character, and one that I can't imagine anything with D'Onofrio as Wilson Fisk that I wouldn't want to see. So he's definitely my number 2.
I mean, and now we have our first and only overlap, because Wilson Fisk was my number 1.
Yeah.
How could I not? We talk about him all the time.
We really
Wilson
do.
Fisk shows up, I think, on Superhero Ethics at least 3 times as often as any other character. I would put myself down in writing on that. I am confident we talk about him more than we talk about any other character, and by a wide margin.
I think that's almost definitely true.
Exactly for the reasons that you state. And again, neither of us actually agree with Wilson Fisk and what Wilson Fisk does. That's not the point. The point is that if he's in the show, we know there's going to be some things we get to talk about, right? He provides such a rich vein of material, like what he's doing, what he does with Poindexter and with the FBI and the fact that he's actually the entire focal point. He is the focus of Daredevil Season 3, not really Matt Murdock. He's there, he's interacting with things, there's some stuff about his character too, but if you look at the framing, what's Foggy doing? Foggy is trying to figure out how to get Fisk out of the stupid penthouse thing. What's Karen doing? Karen wants to get at Fisk. All of our characters, what are the different FBI agents doing? Well, they're interacting with Fisk because they're either getting information about who to go after, or they're digging into, hey, are we getting played by him? Or they are getting played by him, right? Oh god, it's the entire show is centered around the machinations of this one person who did most of this setup while he was in prison. And it's none of the stuff that Wilson Fisk has done this season has been physical that I've seen so far. but it's all been deeply villainous, like really insidious. That rich, yeah, the machinations, the pulling strings from behind the scenes thing that you were alluding to.
Yep.
Like, he's just a very, very, very compelling character, and one that I am excited to keep talking about next year, because I don't think the Wilson Fisk well has run dry just yet.
Oh no, we're definitely doing a whole episode on Daredevil season 3. And that's in part why I think Daredevil, Matt Murdock himself, didn't make it onto my list, because he's as always a really good character. But you're right, Wilson Fisk is so much the heart and soul of season 3 of Daredevil. And in many ways, I feel like where Matt Murdock goes isn't terribly... It feels like of a part of where he was in season 1 and 2, whereas Kingpin, it's just such an interesting new spin on him this year.
Yep. And Kingpin looks like he's actually like evolving and progressing and going somewhere that's growth for him.
Right.
Whereas Matt Murdock seems to kind of be backsliding a bit. I'm actually more interested watching season 3 in Foggy and Karen's storylines and in how they're going to be, dealing with the problem. In a lot of ways, I'm sort of launching into our episode on Daredevil season 3. Sorry,
because I disagree with you there somewhat. But let's definitely put that on hold. And I'm going to do my number one. And yeah, it's great we had a little bit of that overlap, and you got to talk about your number one. Because I'm going to leave the MCU entirely. I'm even going to leave technically the superhero world. But it's the character who I really loved his journey so much. I think in part because it was so controversial, and what I believe about him and what a lot of people believe about him, and so many people so didn't like where this character went this year. But I really loved it, and the questions it raised, I think, are so fundamental to what I care about. And that's Luke Skywalker. I continue to think that The Last Jedi is just such a wonderful piece of Star Wars mythos. I don't necessarily think it's one of the best Star Wars movies, because I think some of the things like the pacing and some plot holes and stuff, yes, I acknowledge they're there. But I think it is a great movie in a lot of ways, and I think what it does with... I'm someone who is so interested in questions of, what is the difference between, like, religion versus the thing that the religion is about, and how do authority things become calcified, and how do beliefs become dogma, and what does it mean to wrestle with having heroism laid upon you and not wanting to be a hero, and that responsibility and failure, and there's just so many things that Luke Skywalker wrestles with in Last Jedi that I think are such great questions. And it's not that I picked him because he's controversial and I was like, aha, look where I am. It's that the fact that he is so controversial means to me why his character and his betrayal is so important. Because, it's an ethically interesting character, but where everyone thinks that he made the right choice or they made the right choice, that's not as interesting. But a character like Luke Skywalker, where the writers make a very conscious choice of where to go with it, and a huge number of people really don't like it. And I think there's some really good ethical questions about why we like it, and some of them don't like it. To me, it encompasses so much of what I love about this entire journey of looking at science fiction and fantasy and superheroes through an ethical lens. And so for all those reasons, Luke Skywalker is my number one.
Yeah, Luke Skywalker would have been on my list if his movie wasn't in 2017.
Okay, that's fair.
It was at the end of 2017, but most of the conversation, right, was this year. I'm not saying, well, disqualified, leave the podcast.
Good job for saving me there. I appreciate that. Because I think that's what it was, is that we spent so much of this year debating and talking about him.
Yeah.
That's...
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, like, a majority of the conversation, like, yeah, the character maybe went on screen in 2017, but what made you say Luke Skywalker has to be, like, best character of 2018 for you was because it dominated so much of the year in those ways. And Luke had, there were a lot of people, I think, who Luke was the paragon, the person on the pedestal who couldn't do any wrong, and seeing him painted in a different way than that was deeply upsetting. I understand that. And then we talked about this on our Last Jedi episode too. It's just like, I'm much happier with the idea that, like, somebody who you thought was incapable of doing wrong didn't always do, the right thing or struggled with things. I think it's a better cautionary tale, if nothing else. So 100% agree. Luke Skywalker, his journey more recently, particularly in The Last Jedi, is one that is, I think, going to also serve as a lot of material for us to talk about in the years to come. And hopefully, it's also, spoiler alert, some Star Wars stuff is on my later list for similar reasons to...
As it is for mine, yeah. So,
yep.
And I just want to make sure we're conscious of time. We're going to kind of keep moving us ahead, even though there's so much we can say about all these, because really what we're listing off is the things we most like talking about. So, of course, we want to talk about them. So our next category is our 5 favorite ethical questions, like the questions that we talked about this year that we really loved. For me, my number 5 is, can he be a superhero who doesn't kill? It comes up in Daredevil, obviously. It comes up, as we discussed, with Superman and with Batman, as we discussed with Jessica Plummer. And I really like the conversations we got to have about it this year, because I think, for me, I have always loved the idea of holding this ethical line of saying you won't kill. But I think there's something so disingenuous about trying to say you can be someone who engages in violence all the time, hitting people. It's funny, even like I'm currently playing the Spider-Man PS4 game, and I'm loving it, and it is such a good game. And Spider-Man, I know, is also dedicated to the idea that he never kills. There are some combat moves I have done in this game where I have wrapped a person up in a web and thrown them 40 feet into a metal pole. That's going to kill a lot of people. So yeah, that was a question I know we kept going back to, and it's definitely one of my favorites from the year.
Yeah, and I like that we talked about, if I'm remembering the conversation correctly, things like exactly what you're describing in your game, where we see heroes who have this sort of hard line on killing, do things that... Yeah, that would actually probably kill somebody.
Yep.
But because of the conceit of the fiction, we're supposed to believe that they didn't, and so it's this kind of trying to have cake eat cake situation.
Yeah. So what's your number 5?
So this year, did you know that our Devotion to a Cause episode was this year?
God, that was so long ago.
It was, wasn't it? I was looking back, so in formulating this list, a little bit of a behind the scenes, behind the curtain thing, I was looking at the list of podcasts we'd done this year going like, what are my 5 favorites? And I saw the picture of Lando Malari and I went, no way, that was 2018.
It's amazing.
But just the idea of, when somebody gets so bought in to their doctrine, to their beliefs, that it becomes a problem, and how those problems manifest in our media, and how that translates to real life as well. I liked that for many reasons, some of them political, but some of them that, like, I got to talk about Babylon 5 again.
Yeah.
Even though I have some problems with it, with the dialogue in particular, it still has just this really rich vein of story ideas. And I
think that's such a good one, because it's such a rich. It is a question we're going to return to again and again. That's definitely one of those evergreen questions for us. So what's your number 4?
Number 4, I liked our talking about Infinity War. Particularly the whole we don't trade lives thing. We talked for a very long time about how that not only were the Avengers inconsistent in adhering to the we don't trade lives ideology in some of the decisions that they made, but that at each step, that sort of idealism and being unable to abandon it were what allowed Thanos to achieve his victory, right? I really enjoyed that conversation from the perspective of, like, when you come out of a movie where the villain wins, it's very rare for me where I'm all like, yeah, the heroes sort of like didn't do a good job at avoiding that, so it makes sense that this is the outcome. And when I walked out of Infinity War, and like, yeah, that tracks. Yeah. They did a bad job.
Yeah, that's that one is also on my list. I'll say later where it is, but it's for all the reasons you talked about. I think it is such a good question, and probably one of the things I most liked about Infinity War, and that I was most frustrated by Infinity War, and as I'll talk about later, it's one of the things that I'm most... there's always the situation, I think, that comes up where you see a character doing something you disagree with, and you're not sure if the writer disagrees with the character. And for me, it's a very important question, because if the writer is showing us a character doing something that we're supposed to think is a mistake, awesome, I love it. When the writer wants the character to do something that the writer thinks is a good idea, and I disagree, sometimes I can still make for a great compelling story because we can disagree with the writer, but it's a very different thing. And as we'll get into, I'm very curious where that's going to go with Infinity War. For me, my number 4 was the glorification of violence. It's something we've talked about, and I sometimes think about with this show itself, because all the media that we're talking about is probably to some extent going to have some degree of violence at some point. Star Trek being a very notable exception, and even Star Trek has some violence, but the difference in how little it does versus most superhero things, I think, is so monumental. But I think we had some great questions. We had some great discussions this year about, what does it mean that we have all of these movies and stories about people resolving conflict through violence? And I know we had a great conversation, especially about, what does that mean in terms of the definition of a hero, and what does it mean that, do heroes look to violence a little bit too soon? So that for me was a really good good one.
Yeah, that conversation is also on my list, and spoiler alert, it's a lot farther up. But similarly, I really liked the conversation. I really liked naming that the fact that so many of our heroes and so much of our media is focused on solving our problems by using violence.
Yeah.
Again, for very personal reasons for me, but it's a topic that I'm really happy to talk about, and it's going to feed into almost any other conversation we have, especially when we get back to talking about the next season of Punisher. I'm sure violence is going to come up again in the next season of Punisher. It's not just going to be him, farming for a season while he's, my revenge is done. I'm going to go, till some fields and whatnot. No, that's not going to be the show.
It would not surprise me if we have more overlaps on this list. So,
yep.
But yeah, so what's your next one?
Number 3 for me was, and this is a shout out to our friends at the MCU cast. Why is Kingpin a villain and Punisher a hero?
Yeah.
It was such a good jumping off point. And even though we made that episode more of a mailbox episode, toward the end we did spend almost 50% of that recording time, I feel, just addressing we don't really think that Punisher is any more a hero than Kingpin, and because of all of the things that we have said about the Kingpin character, slotting him in the traditional, maniacal villain slot doesn't really fit, right? And just really getting into the weeds, really getting into that gray area about exploring the fact that these people have similar motivations, they have similar bad habits, and they make similar choices. And yet we're supposed to think that the Punisher is doing good and the Kingpin is doing bad. Just, really rich vein.
You're right. I think that was such a good discussion. And again, I know they listen, so very, very big thanks to Matt and Jack for throwing that our way. Because it really was. And I think and Jessica, in our recent episode about Superman and Batman, brought up the same question about how every story kind of has a different ethical framework, and it kind of sometimes there's an interesting thing that happens when you take a story from you take a character from one story who is in the world of that story painted as a villain, and then put them next to the moral world of Punisher and the moral world of Daredevil are very different. Made clear by the fact that Punisher was introduced to question the moral world of Daredevil, and so. Yeah, to me, that's such a great example of how those things can come out, and it was such a great discussion.
What was your number 3?
For me, my number 3 is the toxicity in fandom. And this is one of those where it's a favorite in a hard way, because it's something that I desperately wish was not an issue we were talking about. In a lot of ways, this isn't an ethical question as much because I don't think there is an ethical defense of any of the toxicity as much as it is a discussion about. I think there's a very rich ethical discussion to be had about how do we as fans engage in fandoms, knowing that there is quite a bit of toxicity in those fandoms. And what is our moral responsibility to challenge that, to engage with that, to deal with that, or to walk away from the fandoms that have that, and how does all that happen? And that's something we'll talk about a little bit more today, and also I think we'll definitely do a podcast about it later. But we had some really good discussions about that, especially in regard to Star Wars and in regard to Ready Player One. And that was just one of my absolute favorite conversations we had.
Yeah, I mean, ethics of being a fan is my number 2.
All right, we have so many overlaps
really,
here.
Yeah, and obviously, because I haven't mentioned it yet, use of violence was my number 1. So we're just going to blow past those and finish out your list. But yeah, the ethics of fandom in general, that conversation was one that I was really pushing for, knowing that, we're going to touch on some hot button things and maybe piss some people off, but I felt like it was really important. It was more important to talk about it and to talk about the things that when we're fans of a particular property, seem to think it's acceptable to do to our fellow human beings or say to our fellow human beings that really isn't, and we really should be better than that. And that whole, be the change you want to see in the world, be the hero that you want your writers to write about.
And I think that's so well put, and I feel very gratified by the fact. I'm not surprised, but I'm very gratified by the fact that you also have it on your list, because I feel like in many ways it is part of the mission statement of this podcast, especially because while we try to have a really great set of guests we get on and have a lot of diversity in that, I'll be very honest about the fact that all 3 of the main hosts of this show have been straight white cis men. And I don't necessarily think that's a reason not to have the show. I think there's a lot of great discussions we can have, and I also think it's important for us to lift up other voices as we do that and to encourage people to listen to voices that are not our own. But I feel like because of that, and I don't know if you feel this way, but I certainly feel like because most of the time I am noticing the toxicity as an observer, not as a victim. I am not the person who the toxic people come after. And to me, it therefore is so vital that a podcast like ours that isn't necessarily the victims of that toxicity do even more to call it out.
Yeah, I feel like if we said nothing, then we're part of the problem.
Absolutely.
Right? And you gotta name it, and you've gotta, shame it is the wrong way to put it, right? It's not about that. It's about sort of calling attention to this, why these kinds of behaviors, why basically there's a better way of behaving and a better way of voicing your real problems, or analyzing, as we talked about on that episode at length, really thinking about, why are you having this reaction? Like, why is this so visceral to you? Why do you care so much that Luke not be somebody who could have considered murdering a child?
Yeah, I think that's definitely very true. And it's very related to that my number 2 ethical question is the idea of tradition and authority and religion in Star Wars. And it ties into toxicity in fandom because that was one of the things that people got so toxic about. And I kind of already went into detail about this. We talked about it somewhat already with why I was saying all the things about Luke Skywalker, but it raises to me so many good questions. Everything about, how did the Jedi lose their way, and what does that mean? And that wonderful line where Luke says that the idea that if the Jedi die, then the Force will die is such hubris and arrogance. And for me, as someone who has been steeped in a lot of, worked with a lot of, traditions and authorities around nonprofit and social justice work, but especially in religion, I see that dynamic happening all the time. And I loved the conversations we got to have with Becky Allen and with you and with some other people about Star Wars and how all that came to be.
That Becky Allen 2-parter was so much fun.
Yeah,
we should have her on again.
I think on our list that we drew up of episodes to have for next year is just Becky Allen. So Becky, if you're listening to this, just tell us what you want to talk about and come on. we can come up with some ideas, but pretty much anything.
Hopefully not 3 hours again this time, but if it ends up being 3 hours, it probably means we're having a great discussion.
Yeah, let's be clear, that's entirely our fault. And my number 1 was the Do We Trade Lives? So the one we already talked about, but again, there I think we I think that's interesting. That I think for characters there was so much divergence, but for ethical questions there's so much overlap. And I think that's fairly telling about the way you and I both approach these things. Because in a lot of ways, I think of the 10, 11 really, with an honorable mention that I put in, 11 characters we brought up, most of them in some way tie into one of these questions that we just named.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously not into the ethics of being a fan, except for the angle with Luke Skywalker, but that is very, very critical to why you put him on the list, though. So I think that's
definitely,
you know,
and even I would say Mariah Dillard, because I think that again,
yep.
that like the having her be a sexual and romantic character is the kind of thing that some of the toxic parts of fandom definitely fought back against, and I was glad to see them push it. So let's move to our next question, which is 5 things we're excited to see explored in 2019. What is your number 5 here?
So I actually have the Orville down here.
Okay.
I really can't wait for season 2, because of what season 1 did. And we talked about it on our episode about the Orville, but it's this. I really enjoy how just sort of more classic Trek it is, while still being, kind of fun and kind of fresh. And we still have on the books an episode about the finale of season 1 of Orville, because it was good enough that we wanted to talk about it on its own. And I'm just excited to see more of those kinds of questions being explored, more of dealing with sort of this gray area about what is the role of a quote advanced civilization, and dealing with the social and interpersonal issues that we have among the crew of the Orville.
Yeah.
And I'm really hoping that we get I'm going to say his name very wrong now because it's been too long. It's not Yimik. Yimik is Yimik is a goblin in the Adventure Zone. The Blob.
Yeah,
the Blob
character
in the Doctor. Yeah. I still want the he's voiced by Norm Macdonald, isn't he? Yeah. I want that character to be and the Doctor to have the thing that we were talking about that we really wanted to see, where there's some closure to him being a complete creepball.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think that's there's a lot that's unresolved, and I think in some ways it just, and I've been hearing a lot more good things, especially from our friends at Matt Carroll of the MCU cast that we talk about a lot. He now has a Star Trek cast out there. I think it's called the Star Trek Universe. I'll provide a link to it. And he's been kind of making me want, him and Dave Robertson, the other person who's a host, have been making me want to give Star Trek Discovery another chance. But right now, for me, my Star Trek fix is going to come from Orville. And and I would say, that's spoiler, that was number 4 on my list. But the specific thing I said I was looking forward to, I think, is I want it to be a little bit more Trek and a little less sophomoric.
Sure.
I think we had talked about this, and again, I'm not a Hollywood insider. I have no real reason to know for sure, but I've read things that indicate this, and certainly it would make sense, that when Seth MacFarlane started that show, the network wanted a Seth MacFarlane show with a lot of the sophomoric humor that he is known for. But that he wanted to get away from that and to make it more of a, just kind of an homage to Trek kind of a show, and not just trade on that humor. And I think we talked about in the episode we did about the Orville that we saw that less and less in the first season. My hope is now that in the second season, the network might kind of say, okay, Seth, you've proven to us you can make this work. We're going to give you a little more creative control. And that, because I admit I don't love the sophomoric stuff, and it makes it a little harder for me to watch than I would like. And frustrating me because there's so much else that's good there, but it makes me think that's one more reason to be excited for it in 2019.
So what was number 5 on your list?
Number 5 for me is Good Omens. Good Omens is one of my absolute favorite books, especially because, obviously I like religion, I like morality. For anyone who hasn't read it, it is fantastic. It's very funny, and it is very lighthearted, but it deals with some really interesting questions, especially because it's funny, it's kind of about what a lot of the first couple seasons of Supernatural, really seasons 3 through 5, are about, which is, what does it mean to be kind of caught between heaven and hell? And, it's the same kind of thing as Babylon 5 and the Shadows and Vorlons, and what does it mean when you've got these two cataclysmic forces, both of which think that they can know what's right for everyone else, and in their fight with each other, they're just harming everybody in the middle. Good Omens isn't about necessarily people with, high morals wanting to stop these two things, as much as it is two people who are just trying to stay out of the line of fire. But I'm really excited to see that show and see how they explore that, because I think it is such a good book and has such great questions.
Yeah, Good Omens is number 3 on my list.
Okay, we are just...
really loved Good Omens, the book. Really excited to see how it gets implemented on screen, for a lot of the reasons you state. Also because it has some. It's still some comedy because Pratchett, And like, but it's so good. You really like if you haven't read Good Omens, I definitely give the book a whirl before seeing the show, because I have no idea if the visual media is going to be as good, but if it is, then it's going to be really good.
So that's both of our 4s and 5s. What's your number 3?
Oh no, Good Omens is my number 3.
Oh, okay. What's your number
4 is, and like again, we don't have any confirmation on this, but Daughters of the Dragon is what I'm excited to potentially see in 2019. I want another Marvel Netflix show with 2 strong leading ladies, the other of course being Jessica Jones. And I want to see more Misty Knight. Like, I just want her to have a show.
See, interesting, because I really want it to be with 2 strong women, but I don't think it's going to be Misty Knight and Jessica Jones. I think it's
No, it's going to be Misty Knight and Colleen Wing.
Oh, you're saying in addition to Jessica
in addition
Jones.
to
Now
Jess and Trish.
Okay. I thought you were saying Jessica Jones would be one of the Daughters of the Dragon. I was like, I don't think
that's not how that works. Yeah, no. In fact, if they do Heroes for Hire, I would rather see Heroes for Hire be Luke Cage and Jessica than Luke Cage and Danny Rand, only because the gun fu angle at the end of is interesting and it is a canon thing, but like I'm not that into it.
I'm really not. I am. We talked about this before, but my biggest frustration with Iron Fist is I wanted Danny Rand to just totally let it go, not to find another way. But that's a huge tangent. But yeah, I think that's a great one to get into, because my understanding is, and we'll go more into this into my concerns, I think at this point any new stuff involving those characters is going to be on Disney, not on Netflix. And Disney has certainly put out some dark stuff. I mean, Deadpool is under the Disney version of MCU. No, it's Fox, isn't it? Anyway, but they've certainly done some very dark stuff, and I think it's certainly possible they will. But I'm very nervous about that. But yeah, if we get Daughters of the Dragon, that would be amazing. My number 3 is again going to kind of a far end of our spectrum of things we talk about, but one we definitely did an episode about. And I'm really excited to see where the Magic the Gathering story is going to go. We did a whole episode for those who don't play Magic. Just a very quick summary. The story has really been about these characters called the Gatewatch, who, especially myself, but I think both of us have a lot of frustrations with, and it seems like that story is coming to at least a major ending point in the next couple stories we're going to get. And I'm sure those characters aren't going to all die, as I would kind of enjoy, frankly, but I think they will still continue to pop up. But I think there's good reason to think that we may sort of say, okay, we told a Gatewatch story. That Gatewatch story has come to an end. Now let's kind of switch gears a bit and tell a new story. And if that happens, I'd be really excited to see that in the Magic the Gathering world.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen, only because of the direction that Hasbro seems to want that to go, with them wanting to make a motion picture, so they want to have a bunch of... This is very cynical, but I think they do want to have a bunch of easily brandable characters that they can then drum up to something on the big screen, because everything has to be able to be like Marvel in order to succeed. Yeah.
I hope you're wrong, but that's certainly possible.
Yep.
What's your number 3?
Number 3 was Good Omens.
Right, so what's your number 2?
Right. So number 2 is the resolution of Infinity War. So we're getting, what is it called? Endgame?
Endgame, yep.
Right, we're getting Endgame. I really want to see the whole plot line resolved, because I want to see the real cost of doing business with Thanos. We know for a fact that it's not going to stay with all of the people who got erased for contract reasons. This is actually something, as much to the consternation and I think chagrin of my co-host here, I've gotten into wrestling recently, and this is something that is related. Stick with me on this journey.
Okay.
This is something that happens in wrestling too, where when you know people's contracts are coming up, you can predict the storyline, you can predict what's going to happen, and it makes what actually happens a lot less impactful. So, like, again, when we were talking about the how Infinity War ended, and we're like, well, we know these characters aren't going to stay dead, and the characters that are left behind are going to end up somehow going away, because we know contracts are up and we know people aren't renewing. So I want to see that shift and actually see what the world looks like post dealing with the Infinity Crisis.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, and I think maybe it's a sign of either different interpretations of the question or just you being more positive and I being more cynical. That for me is my number one concern for 2019.
Oh, it's also Infinity War's also in my list of concerns. I have a lot of concerns are the same as the excited to see explored.
Yeah, that's fair. And I'm definitely excited about it as well. I'm definitely going to be. I'm really excited to see that movie, and I'm actually making a very specific point. I have not seen the trailer. I'm going to do everything I can to not learn anything about the trailer. It's going to be very difficult. I imagine I will probably see the trailer at some point, but I'm going to do as much as I can not to know about that movie and just go into it blind. Or just go into it without having seen anything. I should not say blind there. But yeah, because I think that's a really good one. So my number two is, and again we've talked about this already, but it's what's going to happen to the Jedi in the next Star Wars movie.
That's my number one.
Awesome.
So,
yeah. I think we've kind of talked that one to death, but I think that there's just there's so many interesting questions. There's so many places where I'm like, I think I know where the writer's going, and I'm a little nervous they're not going there, but I really think they are. So yeah, I'm a little nervous that all of the pushback against Last Jedi, and especially going back to the original director, The Force Awakens was a much safer movie in a lot of ways than The Last Jedi. And I am a little afraid that they go back to that, especially given the pushback against Last Jedi. But I'm really hoping they don't. That's one of the things I'm really excited for in 2019.
Yeah, I'm hoping to see the traditional Jedi ideology challenged and something new presented.
Yep.
Sort of in its place. Is like, well, they didn't have it completely right either. Let's do this.
Yeah.
And possibly that as a bridge that ends up forming between Kylo Ren and Rey.
Yeah.
And let's be clear, that should be two people, agreeing to work together and not in any way a romance, because there's nothing that's bought that. Mm-hmm. And it would be really, really sort of ham-fisted and Hollywood cliche and everything I don't like about romance is as it's portrayed in these stories, to have these two characters hook up.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's no reason for it.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but I'm not as invested in... I'm pretty okay with Kylo just being the villain and it not being a rescue him story, because I feel like what happened with him in episode 2, in episode 8, The Last Jedi, was such a departure from that, and him really getting to the point where he could have been rescued, but he didn't. But you're right, it is where they go with that question, something I'm really excited to see in that movie. And so
what's your number one?
My number one is Captain Marvel. I am super excited for the story. Small point, because I'm a huge 80s nut and I want to see a movie in the 80s, but really because, we've talked about this when we talk about Wonder Woman and some things like that, there is just such a dearth of properties given to women to headline in the world in general, in science fiction and stuff in general, but especially in the MCU. It's one area where I think the MCU has been very deficient to the DC universe. And I'm really glad to see it coming. And I'm really hoping it is a strong, successful movie. But it really obliterates this idea that can't be successful. You'd think Wonder Woman would have done it already, but I know there is still this idea in a lot of Hollywood that people don't want movies with strong women characters as action heroes. And I just am really excited to see that movie for so many reasons, but that is definitely one big part of it. I was super excited for Wonder Woman, and for the same reasons I'm super excited for Captain Marvel.
We want that to build momentum. We want that idea that we don't care that it's a woman superhero. We care, well, I mean we do, but we don't care that it's not a man superhero. I guess, except we also care about that, but not in the way that they think.
Yeah, but I would say I would say that the gender of the character most definitely matters. But I don't need. I think what we're saying is that we don't need it to be a man, and I think the idea that we need it to be a man is ridiculous and really problematic and really toxic, and I really want to see that obliterated. So just let's do a quick rundown, just kind of summing up before we go to the last two questions, because we had so much overlap, people might have gotten confused. So just kind of reading it off, my 5 favorite characters in order were: number 1, Luke Skywalker; number 2, Kingpin; number 3, Mariah Dillard; number 4, Eric Killmonger; number 5, Tandy or Dagger, with an honorable mention for Superman. What were your top 5 heroes?
I had Wilson Fisk. Yeah, characters, right? Because Wilson Fisk was at the top of the list.
Right.
Misty Knight, Jessica Jones, Sam Winchester, and T'Challa.
So there we have 1 overlap. My 5 favorite ethical questions are: do we trade lives? The tradition authority questions in Star Wars, toxicity in fandom, glorifying violence, and can you be a superhero who doesn't kill? What are your 5?
I had use of violence as a means of conflict resolution, ethics of being a fan, why is Kingpin a villain and Punisher a hero, Infinity War, not trading lives, and devotion to a cause.
Okay, so there we have 3 overlap. We're definitely getting more overlap there. And with number 3, it was the 5 things I'm most excited for: Captain Marvel, what's going to happen in Jedi. Number 3 is the next chapter of the Magic Story. Number 4 is Orville, and number 5 is Good Omens.
Right. I had number 1 is Jedi, same thing, continuation of that story. We're getting the final chapter in the last trilogy, or latest trilogy, I guess. Then Infinity War, Good Omens, Daughters of the Dragon. Again, that's an assumption, but I hope it's a safe one. Yeah. And then the Orville was my number 5.
Okay, so again, we had 3 overlaps, so a lot of follow-up. So let's go into the 5 concerns for 2019, because we are hopeful, but have some things we're going to worry about and see. And I'm going to kind of go in a weird direction with my number 5, but it's one that I think is essential, and we haven't really talked about at all, and I think should be talked about, which is we did an episode a long time ago, I think before you came on. Oh, no, actually, no, I'm sorry. You and I did an episode on fan fiction, and I've done episodes in the past with other people about fan-created content and how important that is. And you and I didn't get into this as much, but I think it's a very important part of it, that so much of that fan-created content is often LGBT-oriented or is about sexuality in some way or another, and is often really pushing the bounds of things that don't get discussed in a lot of other places and are having important discussions that need to be had. So one of my biggest concerns for 2019 is what's happening with Tumblr and with Facebook and the real censorship that's happening on both of those platforms. For both of those platforms, they've pushed, we don't know yet exactly how it's going to be enforced, but pretty draconian rules about shutting down discussion of things that are, LGBT, queer-related, anything kind of outside of the sexual norm, that term with great quotes around it. And I think it doesn't seem on the surface part of our purview, but I think that's a huge attack on fandom, and it's a huge attack on a very important part of fandom that is standing in opposition to the toxicity of fandom. So for me, that is one of the big concerns is what's going to happen to those online communities, and where is it going to go, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, that didn't make my list because it wasn't on my radar as something that related to what we discussed, but you're absolutely right, and it is a major issue, sort of stepping out from the context of this podcast a little bit and talking about ethics as it relates to real life. I don't understand how we as a society can let these organizations get away with that. And I mean, in some ways we're not, right? They're definitely being called out on other platforms. But like one of the biggest platforms for calling Facebook out is actually Facebook.
Yeah.
And so that can create some problems, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the very definition of the problem of monopoly, because for a lot, this is taking away the living of a lot of people who had made their living with fan art and things like that. But also it's, I would love to say I'm going to quit Facebook and Twitter in protest because of this. But then this podcast would probably die, because that's the biggest way we promote it. And I don't like that I'm using those resources that are not very good. But I don't know what the alternative is yet. So I'm nervous about that, but I'm hoping the conversation pushes forward. What's your number 5?
So for me, it's a little more selfish, actually, a lot more selfish. But I'm concerned that for people not in the know, Disney is going to be premiering a new streaming service this year, their own priority streaming service. So sort of as a direct competitor for things like Netflix and Hulu Plus. My concern is because Disney owns Marvel, right, that this streaming service will end up de facto killing the Netflix Marvel continuity. And if they're going to if they decide to continue doing TV shows, it would end up being something brand new rather than sticking with the crew and cadres that they have now. And I just think that would be a major mistake with everything that's been built so far, and would really leave me wanting for something that then won't exist, right?
Yeah.
So it's a pretty big concern for me, only because, I mean, I joke about us getting a paycheck from Netflix, which we absolutely do not do. But what we do is we get a lot of material to talk about from them, and I don't like. I'm like not so cynical as to think that anything that Disney put out wouldn't be as good. In fact, I actually have a lot of faith in the Walt Disney Corporation for knowing generally what they're doing. But I'm really invested in the stories and characters we have now.
Yeah. I definitely am feeling the same way, and that concern is on my list as well. In part because I feel like the Netflix shows have been willing. We've talked. I always think this is one of the strangest things is that Netflix, they're allowed to ask hard questions like the morality of the violence they do. To me, there's something so broken about that you can't. That's too dark for the MCU on screen, on movie screens. But yeah, I'm definitely with you that is a big concern of mine as well. What's your number 4?
Number 4, I have The Punisher Season 2. The big concern there is that the sort of continuation of painting him as a hero and glorifying his use of violence toward that end.
Yeah.
I feel as though, and I think we talked about this a little bit and perhaps even disagreed a little bit about it, but I feel like we were supposed to take the raking of Billy? Is that his name?
Yep.
Across the glass at the carousel as just like, yeah, he got his revenge, he's doing it. And I was just mortified.
Yeah.
And I want, when we see Punisher again, I really want it painted with very clear gray strokes. I feel like that would actually make I feel like that would make the character more interesting as well if even the media presenting him wasn't entirely on board with what he was doing.
Yeah, I'm with you there. That wasn't on my list, but I think it's definitely a really important one. Because I think that the writers were trying to say that he was way over the line with how he treated Billy, and that was kind of a sign of just how far he had fallen as well. But I don't know, and I don't think we're going to see until that next season of Punisher. So I'm really curious to see where that goes. My number 4, and again, we've talked about it a good deal already, but it's the Toxicity. I think that we are moving. It's one of those hard things to tell the direction, because I feel like we are doing more to push back against the toxicity in fandom, and we're creating more and more space for people who aren't just straight white men. But because of that, those forces are kind of pushing back against that, and so it feels like, it's that kind of like I remember I went to a talk a long time ago about gay rights. This was many years ago. People were using words like queer and LGBT, and the person was specifically talking about gay and lesbian rights. But one of the terms that they used was, and that's a whole other debate. I'm not trying to say that was okay. I'm just naming it in history. But one of the things that the guy said that I really liked was he was saying, they're fighting back so much because we're winning. And I hope that's the case in what's happening with Toxicity. But then I see things like what happened with Tumblr and Facebook. I see some comments from the people at Disney and Star Wars that maybe they didn't think Last Jedi was the right direction to go, and they might change their mind. I'm really nervous about what's going to happen in fandoms because of the toxicity, and we've talked about it a good deal already, but it's definitely on my list of things I'm nervous about for 2019.
I mean, you could include in your list a certain Supreme Court justice that has been confirmed after a hearing that showed that maybe has a deficiency in maturity, as the Magic Judge program would put it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the man we put a rapist in the Supreme Court. I mean, I think that can be named. And I think that's, again, there are 8 million examples we could use from the real life, just in fandom. But yeah, so that's my number 4. What's your number 3?
So, I'm worried that we're going to get even more male heroes that are just angry men bent on revenge. How many did we have this year?
We had a lot.
Like, you could total it up. It's a not insubstantial number, and it's not an insubstantial percentage of the total heroes. And like, first of all, I just think that as sort of a trope or a painting of a story, it's way played out at this point. So just from a like, I want variety in my media, I'm sick of it. But I'm also sick of it because I don't like it. I don't want this, because I feel like the more that we see it as heroes, as people we're supposed to be on the side of, uh, the more it sort of endorses that it's okay to be that these are, oh, they're a bit troubled, but they've got the right idea about how to solve their problems, even if no character says it. Right? I don't want the ideas of revenge to be something that people actually endorse. I think that the painting of revenge as a problem was done a lot better with characters like Bushmaster in Luke Cage season 2. That's if there's going to be a revenge story, let's do that.
I'm definitely with you there. I think it wasn't on my list, but I think it's definitely a really good thing to be nervous. Not a good thing, but something that I very much understand why you'd be nervous about. Because we get too much of it, and even some of the stories that I think a lot of that conversation we had in just our very recent episode with Jessica Plummer about Superman and Batman was hard because she was pointing out some of the things that are kind of broken about Batman, who is probably my favorite character. He was before Netflix started putting things on television. And he's definitely in that. And I sort of feel like it's not that I think this storyline makes Batman a bad character. It's that we have Batman and that we have some of these others. And Batman is trying not to be a person of vengeance, but I definitely agree with you. There's more than enough of that. I really don't want much more of it.
And I think that it's actually related to my concern there is related to your concern about the toxicity in
very much so
in fandom and our culture, right? It's that same. We need male characters who are capable of expressing something other than anger on the regular. Please.
Yes, definitely.
Yep.
My number 3 in the Batman universe. I'm really not sure how I feel about getting a Joker movie. In part just because I feel like we've had so many good depictions of Joker, and I admit I hated his depiction by Jared Leto in the Suicide Squad movie. But also, to me, what makes Joker such a good character is how he interacts with Batman, and the way he is such a foil for Batman. We're getting a Joker movie that doesn't have Batman, which seems really weird to me. And also, we're getting a Joker origin story, which one of the many things that I love so much about Dark Knight is that every time someone asks Heath Ledger's Joker, why are you the way you are, he tells a completely different contradictory story. And to me, one of the essential parts of Joker is he's kind of like Iago in Shakespeare's Othello. His malevolence is beyond explanation. It's beyond origin. And to give him an origin story and to say this is what makes him the way he is, it just feels like it undercuts so much of what makes that story good. It might be great. It might be, it might defy my expectations, but I'm very nervous about that movie.
Yeah, especially on the origin story thing, like I'm sold. I don't want to see that because that is not that. There's no way I can't. Like, maybe there's some brilliant writer out there who found one, but I just cannot conceive of a way that you can make the Joker character, as I understand him, work.
Yeah.
Well, actually, like, he defies that kind of description for a reason. Right? And so, like, if you actually try to pin it down and nail it and be like, oh, it was this, I'm not going to believe it.
I mean, to me, Joker is the ultimate exception that proves the rule. Because, kind of one of the mission statements of this podcast definitely is villains should be relatable. And for the most part, I think that's absolutely true, and villains should be understandable. Joker works so well because he is such a fundamental rejection of that on such a complete and total level, in a way that I feel like unless you go all the way, it doesn't work. And that's why so many of the Joker, characters trying to be the Joker just don't work. And yeah, so I just don't want the origin story.
Right. Right. We got to clip along here a little bit because we're already pretty deep in. So we're on my number 2, right? It's also Infinity War. So Infinity War was my number 2 thing that I'm excited about. Also the number 2 thing I'm concerned about. because I'm worried it's just going to be a cheap tidying up rather than there actually being some cost associated with the choices that were made in the first movie. Because if all we do is we manage to undo everything that happened, then we just get validated in making those decisions, and we never have to consider that maybe we should have made different choices.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. And I actually had this is my number one concern. And what I put it is the consequences of Infinity War. And part of it for me is the consequences of those we don't trade lives thing. I really want Cap to have to face his Kobayashi Maru. I don't want him to feel like he can use superpowers to get out of it and can save every life. And for me it was similar, but kind of in a more general way. I'm still very invested in the MCU, and obviously I still love the Netflix movies. I'm really excited for Captain Marvel and some of the others. I admit I lost a lot of my love for the MCU this year because they gave us something so powerful at the end of Infinity War where, the snapping, the snapture, and they basically said, look, this is fundamentally changing the MCU. This is a cataclysmic, universe-affecting event. And then they gave us, 5 different movies or TV shows, all set in the same universe, none of which in any way acknowledged it, except for maybe a teaser at the end of 1 or 2 of those.
Yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp had something at the as the teaser at the end.
Yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp had a small teaser at the end. It's a little bit barely referenced in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But it was just so disappointing to me because, for me, one of the points of continuity is that things matter. And that things have consequences, and that if something bad happens in one show, that bad thing has to affect things in the other shows. To me, the MCU was built on continuity, and they really broke their continuity with what happened there. I am going to give them a chance to save it and to explain it, but I was very disappointed in that, and I'm very concerned about that. So yeah, I'm with you there, and I'll also say that was my number 1. My number 2 is the one we've also talked about. It's the future of Netflix. The future of the Netflix MCU. You, I think, said it best. We don't need to go over it, but it's those same questions of what's going to happen with all these great characters. Right. So that's my full list and all the overlaps. What was your? I think we still have your number 2 and number.
Yep, my number 1. My number 1, and it's something that you've talked about a lot already. So we're very much aligned. It's almost like we get along or something, but we're very much aligned in our ideas. My number 1 concern for 2019 is what we're going to see happen with the Jedi. Yeah. Specifically doubling down on them being right and the correct path, and we have plenty of evidence to the contrary, as a concession to a loud minority fan base. Look, like, I get it. I understand why The Last Jedi upset people. I think that you need to live in a world where it's okay to be upset sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a better world. Not that I want there to be suffering in the world, but I think that we should challenge our own ideas more often and be more comfortable doing it.
No, I definitely think that's true. I think that the way the fandom, that part of the fandom at least embraced the Luke Skywalker story and what they wanted was so problematic. And I'm nervous and hopeful. Yeah, I think it really comes down to this question of what's going to happen with the Jedi, especially. I think I mentioned at the time that I so loved Luke saying, like, we have to reject the Jedi. Like, that he's saying that he doesn't want... To me, one of the questions that I don't know the answer to yet, and I think this third movie is going to answer, is the movie's called The Last Jedi. Is the point that Luke is the last Jedi because Rey is becoming something different? Or is the point that Luke has died and now Rey is the last Jedi? And that she is going to rebuild the new Jedi? I very much hope it's the first. I very much hope it is not the second. Because to me, if Rey goes on to be the next Jedi and to rebuild the Jedi, unless she does it in a radically different way where kind of the name is the only thing that's the same, it feels to me like it would so undercut everything. So yeah, that's definitely one of my concerns too. So yeah, once again, a lot of agreement there. Let's go into our last big question, which is we're basically about to talk about 5 things that we wish we talked about more. So it's going to be really tempting to talk about them now, and this is for me more than you. We'll have to fight that temptation and see if we can go through it pretty quick because we've gone a while.
Let's just go boom boom. I actually only have 4 on this one. I was able to come up with a fifth on another one in sort of the 11th hour, but here I've only got 4.
So why don't you actually go straight down your list, starting from number 4 to number 1.
So for number 4, I wish we had covered any DC video media property at all. I feel like it looked like we were. I feel like we looked like we. I mean, we did it more toward the tail end where we talked about sort of Superman and Batman with Jess Plummer in general, and we did a lot. We did 2 comics, right? We did 2 DC comics. We did Red Sun and we did Kingdom Come. What we didn't do is any of their movies. I mostly just think like it seems like we're showing our bias. I don't have that much time to consume that much media, unfortunately. And if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna frankly watch better movies. Yeah. And like, I'm told Aquaman is very good. Which, if you had told me, 10 years ago or so that DC is going to put out a new crop of movies in the 20 teens, and the best ones are going to be Wonder Woman and Aquaman, it's the movie Superman versus Batman is going to not be very good, I would have thought you were trying to con me. Yeah, I would not have believed you.
I'll say I'm trying to go too deeply here. I will respond a little bit. I have Black Lightning on my list, which is a DC TV show, because I thought it was wonderful and I want us to talk about it at some point. Actually, I have a couple of DC things on my list. They're TV shows. I think the DC movies are just not very good. I want to see Aquaman because I want to see Jason Momoa without his shirt off, dripping wet. I think that's going to be very entertaining. If that movie gives us something to talk about ethically, I'm going to be amazed. But I don't think it's going to.
Right.
So yeah,
so that's number 4.
Coming from there. So number 4.
Yep, that's number 4. Number 3 is Iron Fist. It happened. We've only, I want to do that episode. I want to talk about Iron Fist Season 2. I think there's plenty of, I think it's a better mind for things to discuss than Iron Fist Season 1. And then number 2 and number 1 are both much more specific, and one of which we got called out on I want to say Facebook.
Is it by Doctor Who?
No, Jerry Hogarth and Jessica Jones. We did an entire episode on Jessica Jones Season 2. We did not talk at all about any of the things that Hogarth did. And you want to talk about people not doing very ethical things. Jerry Hogarth does a lot of not ethical things. How she deals with the firm, how she deals with that person that's living with her that stole from her, and sort of manipulates her into killing her boyfriend. Oh God. Yeah. That would have wish we had talked about it. We didn't. We didn't even mention it. And then last one, Misty Knight dealing with her disability in the first few episodes of Luke Cage Season 2 hit me really hard. And by the time we actually started talking about Luke Cage Season 2, I'd gotten so wrapped up in Mariah, in Bushmaster, and in the full plot that I'd actually just blanked on that whole thing as being, I felt like a really powerful portrayal of that particular circumstance, how her coworkers dealt with her, how she struggled to be recognized as still capable of doing her job, and fought with her management's the wrong way of putting it when you're in the police, with her superiors, about that whole thing. I feel like we could have talked about that, and we didn't.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good point. It's funny because normally that's disability issues are so dear to my heart that normally that's something I would really want to talk about. I think, again, it's funny when we talk about a whole season of a show, generally we almost wind up forgetting about the stuff in the first couple episodes because with Luke Cage, it hit us with so much. So here's my list. The first one is Black Lightning, which is a DC TV show. I knew nothing about the character, and I think it is a very fascinating take on it. I think to say that it is the DC version of Black Panther, I think, is unfair and not. It's a little bit too much like just putting 2 black characters together, but it does bring up some of the same themes of that both Luke Cage and Black Panther do, especially about what does it mean to be a black man who is powerful in the modern world today. They definitely go a lot into race, and they name the idea that it's harder for him to be a superhero because he's black. It's a really good show, and one I really look forward to us getting to talk about. Number 4, also a DC property, Supergirl. Supergirl's first season I thought was okay. It had some great stuff, and it gave us one really good episode about a villain. Its second season I thought was really bad. Its third got a lot better and raised some interesting questions, and apparently its fourth is raising some other good ones that I'd be really interested to talk about at some point. I know, Jessica, we mentioned it briefly because it's raising again questions about what does it mean to have power and what does it mean to have the ability to fix things when, it's kind of that same Superman problem of how much can you fix things before you just put the whole world in a bottle.
Mm-hmm. From Red Sun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's 4 and 5. Number 3 and 2, I won't go into, are kind of lumped together. They're 2 more MCU shows. It's The Runaways and Cloak and Dagger. They're not the same, but I link them together in a lot of ways. They're both shows about teenage superheroes in ways that I really like, and they kind of do that thing that I love, where half of it is becoming superheroes and half of it is teenage drama. But they both do some really interesting things with what does it mean to develop powers, and what is the responsibility that you have once you have powers, and how does that change things? And especially Cloak and Dagger, there's one scene, I'm going to be very careful not to spoil anything, but basically they take a very established trope and completely flip it on its head in a way that I really want to talk about at some point. So those would be my number 2 and 3.
Yeah, I'll watch Cloak and Dagger. I just got to find the time.
I understand. And then my number 1, and this feeds in actually some feedback we got from someone else, is Doctor Who. I used to love Doctor Who. I got very turned off by it, especially during the later seasons, Matt Smith seasons, and what they did with the character of River Song. And I kind of stopped watching it in protest, and I've heard some really good things about the most recent seasons, and especially about now that they have a woman doctor.
Finally.
Yeah, exactly. And we actually got a great comment from one of our Twitter listeners on Twitter from Hopscotch Friday. And thank you very much, Hopscotch, for writing in. And they wrote, as sort of what were some of the topics from the end of the year they'd want us to talk about. They wrote, the continuing objection to Doctor Who actually treating historical injustices in the show's storytelling. Because entertainment should be politics-free. I think they're saying that the critique is that it should be politics-free, and that's a problem. There are many different versions of this in geek culture, but who got a brunt of it this year? I hadn't realized that Doctor Who got a brunt of it, but that makes a lot of sense. But I think it goes to the same thing that we keep talking about of the toxicity in culture. Because actually, one thing we hadn't named, but I think that one way that toxicity emerges is when people say they don't want politics in science fiction and superheroes. They just want, action stories. And, the old idea is that saying nothing is to defend the status quo. It is taking a political position. That to me is something really problematic. And I knowing that Doctor Who is addressing a lot of those things and that Doctor Who's getting pushback about it definitely puts it on the top of my list of things I want us to talk about more.
Yeah, that's going to be a hard sell for me only because so again, peek behind the curtain for a second. I watched Doctor Who with my wife, and we have been watching from the very, very beginning with William Hartnell, and we are currently on Sylvester McCoy. So we've come a long way, but we're a little bit far away from anything resembling modern Doctor Who.
That's fine.
And so, and I really want to consume all of that media, the good and the bad, because I've already seen some bad. Almost the entirety of Colin Baker's run is kind of a disaster. Which, anyway, not to digress too far on that, but would love to talk about that topic. I would have to recuse myself because I definitely want to stay spoiler free because I'm going to see it eventually and I want the sort of fresh take on it. So apologies. It sounds like a very rich vein, and maybe that's an episode that you do and have somebody else on, and I get to take a night off.
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways it might go. That might happen, or it might be that I use the excuse of wanting to defend you and your lack of spoilers to not make the time to watch it, because I just have so much else I need to do. But I really hope it is one we get into. We did get one other piece of feedback, which was from Brooke Gardner-Durbin, who's a friend of the podcast, a friend of both of ours, the Judge World. It was interesting, we kind of got into this. He wrote in a moral question from 2018. Is it morally allowable to ever support DC again after they inflicted Batman vs Superman on us? Is there ever a point at which we have to say no more second chances?
It's a great question.
It's a great question.
And it's like a really harsh dig, too. But
it is. And one I really understand where he's coming from. I think Wonder Woman is the answer to that question, because I do think Wonder Woman doesn't make me want to watch other DC movies, but Wonder Woman makes me think that it is certainly possible for other DC movies to be quite good. Certainly, I'm very excited for the new Wonder Woman movie, which I didn't include because I think that's coming in 2020, but it might be in 2019.
Yeah. I think it's 2020. I think you're right.
Yeah, but if it's 2019, then it's definitely on my list of things to be excited for. Especially because in the same way that I was saying, I think it's unfair to make Black Lightning sort of the DC Luke Cage or the DC Black Panther. I think it's tempting to, and I think I kind of did this myself, and I want to call that out a bit on myself. It is tempting to say that Captain Marvel is going to be Marvel's Wonder Woman. And I don't think that's fair. I think that they should be seen as two unique, distinct characters who just both happen to be awesome, strong women characters. So kind of a correction to myself there, but I do think that the way that movie was done does give me at least some hope for DC, but certainly it means that I am approaching it incredibly suspiciously, and as I think we talked about a lot with Jess Plummer, at this point I don't have any credit. I don't think they have any credibility to tell us stories about Batman and Superman anymore.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because Superman is their character.
Yeah.
And as with basically every other topic, we could talk about that for a very long time, but we really gotta wrap this up.
Yep.
But I know that you wanted to talk about a top 5 list that is sort of unique to us, and it's something we share and value. So take it away on the 5 ways that people can help our podcast.
Yeah, and and this is kind of a similar list to last time, but it's in closing, 5 things that I want to intro this a little more by saying that, to me, the thing that makes this podcast possible is you guys, the fans. We have seen our listener numbers. At the start of this year, we were getting about 50 or 60 downloads an episode. We're now getting over 250 per episode and sometimes cracking 300, which really just makes me so happy. Because the fact is, Jacob and I could have these conversations by ourselves pretty often. And if we weren't recording it, we could have it over beer, which is something we both really enjoy. But we record it because we want to share this with people, and we want to expand the conversation. We want to be talking with more of you. So I'm just so glad that people are listening. Clearly, those listener numbers are going up, which I think means that people are sharing it with others, and it's spreading, and that is just so great. And I do want to say, like, if for those of you who love the podcast and want to help us, there's 5 things I want to give you a list of. Things that I want you to do. The first is leave us reviews, especially on iTunes, but also any other podcast place where you listen to podcasts. Give us a review. I'm going to be pretty cynical here and say, please give us a 5-star review. If you have a more negative review, maybe contact us in a different way. But certainly no censorship. If you want to give us a negative review on iTunes, please go ahead. The negative feedback is helpful as well. But especially if your goal is to help more people find the podcast and to help us get more people in the conversation, please leave a great review for us on one of those places. The second one is to join in the conversations. We post about these things on Facebook and on Twitter. We're trying to move the conversation to a Facebook group because it's a lot better for conversation. A lot of you I know have not moved over there, and we may abandon that, but I want to keep pushing it a little longer. But certainly on the Facebook page and the Facebook group and on Twitter, we're trying to do more to post discussion questions from these episodes. Please jump into those and post more yourself. We love when people jump into questions. We love when people have things to discuss. And it's fun when it becomes a back and forth between myself and Jacob and myself and a listener, or Jacob and a listener. But even better is when you guys start discussing these things just yourselves and just bounce ideas around. I think it's so great.
If I can add something to this particular point, actually 2 things. So first of all, on the Facebook group, one of the people who's engaged, I want to name Justin Operable is how he's identified on Facebook, had just a really nice long string of like different ideas and conflicts that come up that we engage with, and a lot of really interesting ideas being thrown around there. So we'd love to have more people join in on those different conversations. And on Twitter, this may be the year that I finally crawl out of my cave and go on to Twitter myself, in which case then I'll be engaging as myself on these conversations rather than just letting Matthew handle all of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that would actually help because I think one thing I might do on Twitter is right now there is the Twitter account of this podcast, but it's also my personal account, and I'm kind of using it for both. If you jump on Twitter, I might separate those two and make it one we can both access, and each of us have our own.
Yeah, we can take that offline, but that's probably a good idea.
The third thing is share this with friends. These things spread by word of mouth, and I often hear great stories from you guys about how you found the podcast. You tell me because someone else told you about it, and a lot of times I see someone sharing a link to one of our episodes or to our webpage and tagging someone else and saying, hey, you've got to listen to this. You've got to check this out. Please keep doing that. It's a great way to get people to know about it, get people talking about it. Especially because I imagine if you are a listener of this podcast, it's because you enjoy these questions and probably because you like talking about these questions. Get your friends involved because then you and your friends can be talking about it. You and your friends can talk about, well, what do you think of what happened in Infinity War and Captain America? And let's talk about how wrong Matthew and Jacob were. Whatever that is, great ways to go.
Please talk at length about how wrong we were. I love that too. Yeah,
and I'll say that in two ways. Tell us when you think we're wrong about the ethics stuff, but also call us out when we need to be called out. We had a couple of times where one or the other of us said something that either we misspoke or something that we needed an idea of ours corrected because it was problematic, and we really are so grateful to those listeners who have called us out in those ways. So any of those disagreements, please let us know. The fourth one is, and especially now because right now we are planning what we're going to talk about in 2019. Give us ideas for content. Give us questions you want us to explore. We have a post up right now on both Facebook and Twitter asking exactly that. Hop on there. Tell us about your favorite media. Tell us about a video game. I'm playing the Spider-Man video game on the PS4, and something's happening to me that has never happened to me before, which is, I know many people are going to think I'm very late to the party. I am having emotions about characters in a video game. I am wrapped up in the Spider-Man story in a way I never thought I could be in a video game.
Oh,
I know.
Matthew, video games are on the table now?
Video games are... They're on the side edge of the table, and I want to say, they're lobster.
I'm gonna push them into the center of the table really quickly. Okay. If you give me you give me an inch, I will take a mile.
Okay, well, if you are listeners who do not like video games, write in so I can tell Jacob that we don't want to alienate too many of you, but we will talk about that somewhat. But yeah, throw us ideas for any of that stuff. And the last way you can support us, you tell us. Whatever you think you want to do to help, support the podcast, get the ways out there. Give us ideas. Give other fans ideas. This is a project that obviously Jacob and myself and also Paul are kind of at the head of, but we want all of you guys involved in. So any of those things you want to do, any other things else you want to do, I'm also going to throw in a sixth thing to the list, which is that 2019 may be the year when a Patreon or something else like that becomes a thing. So we might be asking you guys to support the podcast in some more direct ways. If you can do that, great. If you can't, no problem at all. Please keep listening. There's never going to be any fee for any of this. We want this out and available to everyone who wants to listen to it, no charge. So that's me, my wrap up. Thank you guys again. Jacob, do you have any kind of last things you want to hit before we close?
No, only to say that I got in doing this because I like it. And I'll keep doing it for as long as I have the time and bandwidth, and I hope that continues for a long time to come. Very happy to hear from. This year was the first time somebody came up to me and went, "You're on Superhero Ethics," and I was like, "I actually don't know who you are, and you know who I am because of the podcast." That was a really cool experience. I'm excited to have more of that happening.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's not you're that idiot who said this thing, and it's more of hey, I thought you said something really interesting. But you know what? If you want to be you're the idiot who said this thing, that's fine. Yeah. I probably need to hear that then.
It is, as some of the people in our lives might point out, Jacob and I might be blessed with a slight bit of ego, each of us, and the occasional pricking of that by our fans.
I mean, speak for yourself. I am incredibly humble. The most humble. You've never seen somebody this humble.
There you go. But yeah, so again, thank you guys all. 2017 was a good year for the podcast, and made me feel like it was kind of a fun passion project. But I remember at the beginning of the end of the year, I was kind of wondering, where's it going? What are we doing with it? the way it has exploded this year just gives me so much heart and makes me love this so much. Seeing our numbers go up, and just thank you guys all for being fans. Keep following us on Twitter, on Facebook. Both of those are Superhero Ethics. You can email us at superheroethics@gmail.com. And mostly just keep being great fans. And I hope whether with us or just with your friends, keep discussing these ethical questions. Because I think, honestly, this, I don't think that this show is doing this. I think with superhero stories, science fiction, fantasy, all these things, they hold up a mirror to the real world, and they give us chances to make the world a better place. And I'm just so glad that so many people are interested in these discussions about how we can do that. So on behalf of myself, on behalf of Jacob, thank you guys so much. Have a happy new year, a happy holidays, however you celebrate, and look forward to talking to you in 2019. Bye-bye.